have ethical codes that guide their behavior in the field, as they rely on the relationships with the others in order to conduct their research. In the ethnographic process, informants or key participants can help you to induct the ethnographer into the society and to explain its customs and their ways. Now, what do I mean by that? I'll come into my own. I'll reflect on my own fieldwork in a bit, but in order to understand this, when you are going to the field, you always need an entry point into your field. It's not that you have an arbitrary sort of entry point into your field. You need someone who has already been there, who has already been part of your field, to head to guide you into that field, to guide you into that particular community, into that particular setting. They will be your first in informants, your first respondents as to when you have a question, when you have a doubt, or if you really want to understand if you really want to get familiar with the community, they will be your first key respondent as to in order to understand how does a community actually work. And then based on that, based on your first key people whom you meet, you will also meet a whole host of new people based on the contacts that this person will give you. It's now that part is called as snowballing interview, because it's like a snowball. Like, your contacts will keep growing one after the other once you enter the field, but your entry point has to be defined by someone who has already been there in the field. It can be someone from an NGO, it can be someone from civil society, it can be someone from, it can be a whole host of people who are already there living on the field, who understand the field much better than you do at that point. But you need to have an entry point, because you're coming in as an external observer. Even if there have been some cases where if you want to study your own community, when you look at your own community, sometimes with these tools, your perspective might be very different from what the community actually feels. But even if you're studying in your own community, there has to be someone, be it a ritual or a culture or something, or a large scale development process. There is always someone who is there, who will be ready to guide you to in order to understand the wider dynamics of that process. So what do you have to do when you enter the field? Traditionally, anthropologists have attempted to arrive at an emic perspective, or an insider's point of view. In other words, ethnographers who wish to understand the structures, categories, and patterns of behavior as conceptualized by the members of the culture that they are studying. This is contrasted with the ethic model, which analyzes cultural meaning as seen from the outside by an objective observer. What is your responsibility as a field worker, as someone who is being part of the as someone who has gone to understand the culture? Your job is to understand the culture from the way the people within the community understand the culture. You should not superimpose your own understanding of the culture upon them. That is not going to help you in any way or form. So this is what we say, that there is a distinction between the emic. Emic is considered as to be the perspectives from within. Ethic is considered to be the perspectives from outside. It can also carry your own observations, your own biases, your own your feelings, which might not be in line or in coherence with what the people of of the community which you are studying can carry. So the task is that you have to really make an effort. That's why I'm saying that you cannot arrive at an emic perspective with 3 or 4 month field engagement. You need a much longer time than that to completely immerse yourself in inside the field. Sorry. Now, I mentioned the word bias. Now, if I have to ask you in layman's term, what do you understand by the word bias? Okay, when you favor a particular viewpoint, okay, and see, it's you're always carrying. All of us are carrying some inherent bias within us when we are going to the. Even if we're not conducting field work by default, we are carrying some sort of bias in inside of us. That can be a huge barrier when we are conducting field work, because if we carry our biases to the field itself, the outcome or the scientific method in which we are trying to understand some other culture or some other community might not be necessarily true. So you have to make sure that whatever biases you are carrying in and of itself, you have to really park them at the door, and that takes effort, because you are by birth you are informed by certain cultures, by certain traditions, by certain patterns, which can be in sharp contrast to the community which you are studying. So you have to acknowledge, first of all, you have to do a self-reflexive exercise, saying that we have been carrying certain biases that we carry within ourselves. We have, unless and until we acknowledge that, we cannot go and we cannot move to the next step. So this is something that was not. If you go and if you do a historical survey of the first of the earliest anthropological works, uh, anthropologists did never openly mention their bias. But now, because of the fact that there have been lots of anthropologists from within communities themselves who have come out and said that the kind of field work or the kind of observations or the kind of reports or the kind of data sets that were generated in the past does not accurately reflect our own reality. It is now that it is getting in that bias as a phenomena is getting increasing attention. Anthropologists today are increasingly aware of their own views and biases that they carry with them into their field. Now, it can come from your home culture, it can come from your workspace, it can come from multiple other areas which has influenced you in a way, and in maybe in terms of your thinking pattern, in the way you maybe perceive the world. But you also have to acknowledge, wherever possible, how this affects your own methods and your own findings. Bias can be a very powerful tool in defining what are the method that you are choosing to conduct your own fieldwork. So you have to acknowledge that, because it can be a very you might not be you know um, to use I mean, for lack of a better term, you might not be psychologically aware that you are using bias, but it is in subconsciously playing a part in understanding, in sort of defining your own your method and your findings. So you have to make an effort to really, once you have prepared a questionnaire, just have a don't just go to the field with that. Read that 2 3 times, maybe read it after, maybe after a day, or maybe after 2 days after you've written it, and just reflect that what are the questions that you have actually written on that questionnaire. Is it somehow biased towards your own feeling, or is it an open-ended questionnaire, that which means that is it open for interpretation by other people, by other cultures. um, and yet, despite all our best practices, the best fieldwork, and this is something I can vouch for, is unpredictable, because you are carrying a certain notion of the field in your mind, that this is how the field will actually be. But once you reach the field, it's an open-ended scene, because the dynamics, because you have carried a particular sense of the field inside of you, but once you reach the field, you will see that how quickly the dynamics have actually changed from the time that you had perceived the field. So you always have to be prepared. You have to be prepared for an unpredictable fieldwork. Things might not go the way that you have intended them to go. Things might not turn out the way that you wanted them to go. Sometimes on the contrary, you might go with a very lower expectation, and then you might get a very higher output. So all kinds of permutations and combinations are possible once you go to the field. So always be prepared. Don't always, sometimes I've heard my friends saying that, oh, things didn't turn out the way I was looking, I was hoping for in the field. And what they actually mean by that is that it's taken on an unpredictable turn which they did not perceive, which they did not really take into account. So fieldwork, despite all your preparations, despite all your meticulous preparations, it can go in a way which you never experienced. Maybe you can change your research questions. Maybe you can change your whole research. The whole pattern of your research, what you had earlier intended to do, can completely change based on what you actually see when you go to the field. So it's you it but that is not to say that you should not go to the field prepared with your questionnaires, prepared with all your tools. Despite that, this is just to say that despite that, there's always an element of dynamic change which you might not have perceived before. And this is where, because of the fact that it is so unpredictable, this is where your what we call in anthropology as the reflexive approach. It acknowledges that no researcher can be fully objective, and that fieldwork is the exercise itself constitutes of an ongoing dialogue of consent and mutual respect between the participants and the ethnographer. It is always an ongoing dialogue that is taking place even when you are not there on the field. I can say from my example, my field is in one of my field is in Shillong. I'm still in touch with my respondents in Shillong at this point. We constantly discuss about issues about the about the political movements that are taking place there, even though I'm not physically on the field right now. But this is the level of say trust or relationship that you need to build with your respondents. That even if you're not physically on the field, you have to make sure that you will constantly be in touch with them. You will constantly have a dialogue with them even when you are not there on the field. And this is something, the reflexive approach is also about a self reflective approach towards standing towards the field work, saying that um, there is a difference between subjective and objective truth. So we can say that and an objective and a subjective truth is often seen as the definitive truth, and an objective one is seen can be seen as that this is the ultimate truth. But what anthropology is saying, that you have to acknowledge that there is nothing called fully objective on the field. It is always reality, truth, culture is always dependent on the context, on the culture of the societies or the people whom you're actually studying. So always keep that in mind. Always know that you cannot fully understand their culture even after a long period of stay with them. But what matters is you need to have an ongoing dialogue with them. That's when it's and that effort is dependent on you. Like it is your effort that will actually count when you really look back at your own work. The more you engage with the community, the greater are the chances of your understanding that social reality. Okay, so this was the section before this was the part when you have to sort of prepare yourself for ethnographic fieldwork. So once you come to writing ethnography, like the art of writing itself, which is what we are here to do, like how do you write an ethnographic fieldwork? Um, this writing differs from other types of academic, historical, journalistic, or even say travel writing about peoples and places. one of the big criticisms that our batch, some of my friends used to face from their guide, is that they often, our guides often used to tell us, don't write like a journalist, don't write like a journalist. Ethnography is not journalism. It's not, you have to really get out of that lackluster attitude of writing like a journalist. Now, what does that mean when you're saying that ethnography is not journalism? What I mean, if you were to, and I kept thinking about that, what does it mean that what does this whole, what is the distinction between journalistic writing and ethnographic writing? And then in my own mind, I came to the conclusion that, okay, a journalist can be in the field maybe for a day or two or three. They can understand the reality based on the immediate changes or the immediate effect that has taken place on that part. Ethnography differs from it because it is a long term engagement with the field. You really immerse yourself in that field. You understand, if a conflict takes place between two communities, a reporter will come and say that, okay, community X has had a conflict with community Y, and they might not necessarily get into the detail as to why that conflict has taken place. But an ethnographer, based on their long-term engagement, can really write out a detailed report saying that, well, it's happened because of maybe cultural tension, maybe social tension, maybe ethnic tension. It can be maybe because of land issues. It can be a whole host of issues that are informing that conflict. So that's what we say, that when you write ethnography, ethnography is very detailed. It's not just a quick cut solution to what you have observed right now. With this needs a long term in this is why I kept saying that you really need to be immersed in your field in order to understand it. If you don't understand your field completely, there won't be much difference between your writing and, say, the writing of someone who's just come for a day or two to report on that. Now, it can be a journalist, it can be a travel writer, it can be a blogger, it can be anyone. So the ethnographic writing differs on, in terms of depth, in terms of how deeply have you really understood the society or the community in which you are, whom you are actually studying. Now, this is important. Whenever you go for your field work, though, I mean, those of you who will go for your field work, you always have to carry your field work diary with you, your field work notes with you every day. Or maybe the way I conducted my field work was that I used to go for field work every alternate day, and I used to write down extensive notes in my diary based on what I had seen, based on what I had observed. I used to come back and maybe take a day off and translate that note immediately into a sort of a report, or a sort of a, not exactly blog, but I would say a personal report that helped me to keep track of how has how has the dynamics of the field actually changed. But it is, again, ethnography is not just that. Even if you maintain a record of what you have observed in the field over an extended period of time, you have to go more. You have to go much more than that, than much more than just recounting what you saw in your daily lives. This is where it gets important. Why? How does ethnography differ from other writing forms? Because fundamentally, you are engaged with structural powers. The way society has been structured, the way cultures, the way the world has been structured based on your particular field. It engages, and the way disciplines, be it sociology or anthropology, have been framed over a particular period of time, over the last 200 years. And this is where ethnography engages with the theoretical foundations of anthropology. Your fieldwork can challenge a lot of the earlier existing work that were already there, which was, maybe it was not written with a complete immersion in the field, or it was written with a certain bias. If you are honest with your fieldwork, if you can really push your fieldwork in terms of understanding, uh, in terms of understanding the field, you can engage with not just the current reality, you can also engage on a wider scholarship in terms of how can you change the whole idea, the theoretical foundation of anthropology, or in this case, or um, sociology. And it is always written with the cultural contextualization in mind. Your fieldwork, your ethnography. This is something I keep telling my students back in my class, that you might begin your fieldwork with a personal problem. You might begin with some personal discomfort or a personal observation that, okay, I want to study this, or this. Once you actually start engaging with that problem, your output will always engage with a structural issue. It won't remain your personal problem alone. It will transcend you. It will automatically transcend. It transcends the particular, and it starts engaging with the universal. So this shift which you will see, that shift comes up once you start writing, because you're engaged with structural issues. You're engaged with issues that transcend your immediate reality. And here it's saying that you have to talk, your fieldwork, your ethnography needs to engage with anthropology as a discipline. And you also need to provide a greater understanding of the cultural world that has been explored by the ethnographer. What is your contribution ultimately? After you've conducted your fieldwork, after you spent so much of time, you've spent an effort, you spent over more than a year. What is it that you actually achieve with the time frame that you've spent with that community? What has been your understanding? All of that needs to come out ultimately as that will ultimately be your contribution to the society, to not just society, to that particular society, but to the discipline as well. Your fieldwork, if done well, can add a new perspective to the discipline which might not have been there before. And that's something that you should always carry in mind, that always try to be innovative, try to see that how can you really make a difference in this discipline which might not have been there before, which might not have been in existence before. And the whole aim of ethnographic writing is to produce work that contributes to and advances the comparative interpretation of human cultures and society. So, if you have studied a particular group or a particular society, and your friend has studied some other group or some other community, at the end of your fieldwork, at the end of writing your thesis, maybe if you meet over coffee and discuss that, okay, what was your work like? What was my work like? What will ultimately come out of that conversation is that what you have done is that you've basically looked at two very different communities, two very different societies, and your conversation will flow from the fact that how did you advance each other's understanding of that particular society. Now you can only do that if you yourself have had a deeper understanding of that, of your own field, and ultimately the conversation will go to a much broader idea of human cultures and human societies, and which is a very vast topic in and of itself. So always keep it in mind that when you write ethnography, don't just write it as an immediate report. Always engage with the historical, the theoretical foundations of anthropology. What was written about that community, maybe in a particular frame of time? Is it really valid? Was it wrong? Was it a wrong interpretation of that community when it was written in that particular frame of mind? And how is it that your fieldwork has, in a way, made a difference, or made a departure in the kind of in the understanding of that particular community? And then this is something I mentioned. I just um, uh, added here because I felt that this is something that after doing all of this work, what is it that constitutes of an academic thesis? How will you actually put all your material together once you've studied, once you've done all your research, all your data? how do you coherently put this into an academic thesis? So you begin with the introduction. It's a brief background of the research. You sort of explicitly say that this is what you wanted to do, and within that you see what are the limitations of the current state of research that has taken place in that area. The second is the review of literature, where you have to do an extensive discussion and analysis of on how different authors have dealt with the same issue that you are dealing with at the current time. And once you look at different authors or different people who have engaged with the issue, always try to see, is there an intersectionality in their discussion? Are different authors who might not have met each other but through their work are talking about the same issue? Is there something, is there a convergence, is there a meeting point between their various discussions? And if so, is it matching to your own idea of the research, or is it not? So that's something that you really have to see. The third is the research objectives and the research questions. Maybe three or four research objectives, and based on that, your research objectives and research questions have to match. Your Each of your research questions will be drawn out from the um, research objectives that you have framed in your mind. And then this is the first three are field work. This is something that you conceive of before you go to the field. After that, once you've come back from your field work, you have to spell out the result of your work and the discussion. So you have to spell out the depth in the depth of the issues, field observations, your theoretical and literature in engagement, and also now you are no longer, as I said, now you are no longer solely in charge of that issue, of the problem, because you are already engaging with a larger structural, with a larger theoretical part. That's when you also have to see that, are you, or can you see an intersectionality in your own work? Is there a similarity between your work and what the previous authors or the previous researchers have done in their work? Or is there a certain departure? Is your work saying something new which the previous authors have not said so far? And then after analyzing all these issues, when you conclude, when you finish your thesis, you have to give a brief description of, what was achieved, what were the challenges that you faced while you were doing your fieldwork. All of us have faced challenges while doing fieldwork, so it's never a hunky-dory thing to go to a field and try to understand the field. It's always an uphill task. And then, what are the results that came to you that came in your through in your research? And then ultimately, how does your research how has your research ultimately contributed to the discipline that you are in? um, as I said before, it begins on a personal scale. It grows up into a much more macro scale, and then your ultimate thesis, your ultimate, whatever you've written at the end of that time, that will be a contribution not just to yourself, to the community, but it is also a contribution to the discipline. So you have to give a note as to how do you feel that your work has enhanced the understanding of that particular discipline. So one thing that you have to keep in mind is that your thesis has to be structured. I've never seen of an unstructured thesis. What do I mean by that is that when you're bringing your facts together, when you're bringing your data and your material together, you have to tie it up in a very coherent manner. And the idea is not just to tie it up or be coherent. Once you do that, you're educating yourself on the community, you're educating yourself on the structures, and you're educating, after educating yourself, you are educating the third or the fourth reader who will read your thesis or your paper or maybe your book. not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe after 10, 20, 30 years, if someone picks up your work and says that, okay, if the next generation of researcher comes and says that, okay, I would like to work on this particular issue, the first person whom they will refer to is your work, because you are the first point of you are the first immediate researcher who had conducted a fieldwork, and then they will go back in time and see other researchers who have worked on that issue. So you are also carrying a responsibility to the future generation of researchers who are coming after you, whom you have never met. The first generation of anthropologists had never met us. We will never meet the next generation of people who will be coming after us. So your work should it the thesis carries within it responsibility of educating the next generation of people who will come and pick up the work where you have left it. So this was part of this is what I had. This is more of a theoretical um, part up till now. So now I just quickly want to sort of reflect from my own fieldwork, and maybe how much time do I have? 10:34. So I'll talk about for another, say, 15-20 minutes more, and then I'll take a break. I'll just reflect from my own field work as to the kind of work which I had done based on this framework which I just shared with you. My own PhD had explored the modalities and the mechanisms through which land alienation and land acquisition had taken place in the context of urban development in tribal areas. I had looked at Shillong in the northeast, and Ranchi in Jharkhand. So mine was a comparative study. It also looked into the implications of such developments on the affected tribal people in regard to their livelihood and their constitutional and legal rights, and also in the way that they have been articulating and addressing their issues. The setting of my PhD work was at Greater Ranchi, which is in Jharkhand, and the New Shillong township, which is in Meghalaya. These are the two capital townships that are being built for each of the state. One of the reasons why I was drawn to this project of mine was that an interesting aspect of this urban development was that both were in tribal areas, but one happened to be in the fifth schedule of the Indian Constitution. The other was in the sixth schedule of the Indian Constitution. Now, if you read the fifth and the sixth schedule of the Indian Constitution, you will see that they are legal provisions that have been guaranteed in the constitution, through which fundamentally earmarked these areas as lands which non-tribal groups cannot purchase. But my fieldwork came up with a completely different observation of the same. What I saw was that if tribes have to sell their lands, the idea is that they can only sell their land to other tribals. If land is being sold to non-tribals, this can only be done with the approval of the concerned authority. That is, in the case of the fifth schedule, it is the district magistrate, and in the case of the sixth schedule, it is the autonomous district council. Yet, what I observed was that notwithstanding such provisions, despite the fact that it has such tight-knit provisions, there has been alienation of land from tribes to non-tribes, as well as the acquisition of the tribal lands by the state as well as the non-state actors for the purpose of urban development. And one of the reasons why I was drawn to this project was that there exists a lacuna. There's a real gap in the academic documentation and analysis of the phenomena that has been mentioned above in the context of urbanization and of urban development in the scheduled areas. Although a large number of towns and cities have grown in scheduled areas, tribes often form a negligible section of the urban population, and it is only in recent years, due to migration and due to other factors, that you can see their visibility. So for me, it became worthwhile to explore as to how the protective provisions in the constitution, the legal enactments, and the administrative rules were accommodated, and how have they been negotiated in the scheduled areas. And it is in this context that I was trying to analyze the urban development both in Ranchi and in Shillong. So when I come to the main fieldwork part of it, I spent over a year in total on my two sites, from April 2018 till April 2019. So that was the that was the total period of my fieldwork. I was in Geelong. I was in Geelong from July 2018 till November 2018, and in Ranchi from January 2019 till April 2019. And before that, before I went to the field, I had conducted a sort of a preliminary pilot study to understand the site. And this is important. Don't just jump into your site without conducting a pilot survey or a pilot fieldwork, because a pilot survey will help you to understand the area. It can help you to get in touch with your first contacts who will ultimately guide you in into the field. And this is something which I had done, because it helped me to understand the site, to observe the key issues that urban development was unleashing on that region. It helped me to identify potential key respondents with whom I would conduct in-depth interviews during my main fieldwork. So before I jumped into my main fieldwork, I had done this sort of an exercise to help me familiarize myself with the field, so that once I come back to the field, it won't be a sort of a new area for me. So in Ranchi, I had conducted my pilot study in September 2017 for 1 full month, and in Shillong I had conducted my pilot study in May 2018. That was again for a month. So personally, I use the most significant tool for off data collection that I used for my research was in-depth interviews with my respondents. In my discussions with them, when I was talking to them, I was primarily concerned with how are they, as they belong to tribal communities who have traditionally been living in villages or in forests. How have they been looking at this new phenomena of urbanization and of urban development? Um, the urban part, when once tribes start moving from, say, rural or forest areas into urban areas, how have they been negotiating their lives with this new space? The fact is that now, once you move to an urban space, any urban space, it is not a homogeneous space. It's always a heterogeneous space where you are engaging with people from different communities all the time. These occupations, the people who are living there, they are associated with different kinds of power positions, with prestige, power, income. It's and tribal communities now, if you see them in Shillong or in now in Ranchi, they are no longer relatively egalitarian as tribal communities were before. They have also been exposed. This is what urbanization does. It exposes you to a whole host of people from different ethnic origin, religion, belief. So in this backdrop, when I had this backdrop in mind, I was keen to understand that how has the community been taken to these new developments, and how have they been adjusting or say negotiating in that space. So my field site was very different what has been conducted, the kind of research that has been conducted in tribal studies predominantly, because they have been predominantly village studies, or they have been rural studies. And I was trying to push that argument forward, that you have to take cognizance of the fact that people have been migrating into cities. And so I'll just jump to the last part. I'll say that, see, if you see, in my field work, as compared to broadly homogeneous uh, set of people whom I might have met earlier on, I had to deal with a cross section of people who were part of this process, including institutions such as the urban development authorities, municipal authorities, district council members, tribal activists, and NGO leaders, as well as the tribal people who have been affected through displacement. So what it did was that it gave me all these different positionalities, gave me a very varied understanding of how urban development has actually taken place, how has it actually unraveled in these areas, because all of them have different viewpoints, all of them have different perspectives based on the job, based on their own um, social and economic position that they hold. So the fact that I got a whole host of perspectives allowed me to analyze it on a much broader scale than I would have had to analyze, say, if I were just focused on a village area or just an agricultural area. So, what were the challenges that I faced during my fieldwork? Since this is a comparative study which I was conducting, there were various challenges of each region. There were like Jharkhand had a different challenge, Meghalaya had a different challenge. The first challenge, but what was common was that the first challenge was the collection of data itself. Now, these are very, in a way, you could say it's only off late that people have become aware of these urban projects, of these new townships which are coming. So there was very little public consciousness among the local people itself as to how are these projects actually affecting them. There are very few people who were actually willing to share information on the same. The government officials whom I interviewed were very in a way reluctant to share information, citing confidentiality. And it's only when I assured them that my project was purely for an academic purpose that they opened up and they began to share data with me. Um, some of the respondents whom I met, both in Ranchi and in Shillong, were very old. They were not able to speak properly, but they were very generous with the time that they gave me, and the conversations and the insights into the issues which they gave me. When I say insights, they were able to give insight because they had spent so much of their time in that field. They had acquired a wealth of issues which they were able to help me guide with, and through which I was able to see I was able to see the pattern of development that had taken place over time. Um, now, even despite the fact that I'm an Adivasi scholar myself, some of the issues, some of the land and legality issues were challenging to me because I had not studied that as I was growing up. So I had to get accustomed to that through the field work, and this is when that I realized that how complex these issues actually are. The more you spend time with them, the more you actually realize how complicated the land issues can actually get, and that really requires. It took me almost a year to sort of understand these issues, and then to unpack them while writing. It was only when I started to write that I got a certain sense of clarity in within me, and then I was able to make sense of it as I was writing my thesis. Ethically, I'm aware that I'm telling the story of two different tribal lands. I have to be very sensitive. I have to be mindful of the fact that I kept the names of my respondents anonymous. I didn't. If you see my thesis, I have not mentioned them by names anywhere. I made sure that their anonymity is maintained. There was full consent that was taken from them before I interviewed them, and even when I was recording some of my interviews, some of them which were turned out to be longer interviews, I assured them that that their words would be helpful for me only from an academic point of view. And you had to this is something that you have to really once you're there on the field, once you're talking to your respondents, you have to put them at ease and say that, okay, this is something that is being done for an academic purpose. And you have to be honest with them to say that if I'm talking to you, if I'm trying to collect data from you, it is for an academic purpose. And it really, if you can be honest, if you can be honest with your respondents, they will be honest with you. And then the process of data collection will be easier for you. And then you can, once you understand the issues properly, it will help you to write about the issues even in a much better way. So with that, I think I will end it over here, and I would say that maybe uh, one thing that you really need to be that you have to keep in mind is that um, you know your ethnographic fieldwork is not for you alone. As I've mentioned it, it is always for the community whom you're studying, and it's b for the larger discipline to whom you will ultimately contribute. So uh, don't don't think of these projects as a sort of a bubble or a self-contained isolated project, because you will always be engaged in the larger structural issues that you will face while you are doing your fieldwork. As it might not be something that you will realize immediately, but once you are there on the field, once you really start working with people, with archives, you will note that once you translate your observations into writing, once you start writing, that is when you will be engaged with a much broader thematic, theoretical, and much more complex structure than what you actually began with. So once you begin that journey, I think I would say that um, it's a journey. It's a process. It's not something that comes to you immediately, but you constantly have to be engaged with it through writing, through reflection, through analysis. It is then that you can reach a certain point of say understanding and clarity, both for yourselves and the readers who will actually read your work. So with that, I'll end it, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take it. So this part I'll end over here. So thank you so much. Yeah. Even if they have questions, they can.
Uh, Participants, if they have any questions, can just unmute themselves and go ahead and ask the question. I see there's one person who's raised the hand. If you have any question, please unmute yourself and ask the question.
So good morning.
Hi.
Hello. Yes. Basically, sir, I just want to know about snowball sampling.
Okay.
Yes. Sir.
Okay. Just about snowballs. So basically, what snowball sampling is that if you go to a field, if you go to your field, you meet your primary respondents, the people who have been, the people who will actually invite you inside the field. They will be your primary respondents, and then they will help you to build contacts with other people in that field. So the snowball, like if you see a snowball, what does it actually do? It keeps increasing as it rolls down. So your contacts will also increase as in the more you spend time on the field. And this is one of the reasons why it's called as snowball sampling, because the size of your respondents keeps getting more and more as you spend greater time in the field. So that is basically, I mean, at the very basic level, that's what we mean by snowball sampling.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. That's just right. Yes.
Kirtana, do you have any questions? Anybody here has anything to ask from session one? So, how can like ethnography still or better into public knowledge? Because like it is most of the public discourses. So the general layman are the general laymen are mostly informed by fast-paced journalistic news reporters, and there might be cases when public policies are made based on these detailed studies, but owing to the lack of nuance in the general discourse, the general population might protest against some changes. So, how can ethnography help in better informing the public?
Yeah. Thanks. I think that's a very good question. I think one of the if you really see the history of public policy, it has been it's been largely informed by the works that anthropologists and sociologists or economists have done over a substantive period of time. But the fact is that the immediate public opinion is formed by what you see in the media, what you consume in the media, your social media feeds. Or one thing that you can counter is that the one way in which you can counter that is that you have to, in a way, these days you have these blogs of sociology, anthropology. Make your work more public through your own effort. Maybe you can start a blog. You can invite followers. You can invite people from outside your domain. One of the reasons I'm seeing, teaching in an IIT is that people from non-HSS backgrounds might not understand your work. They might say that, what are you doing? But if you can start right over here, that if you can invite people who are not from, say, a sociology background or an anthropology background or even an HSS background, like the way, I mean, from my experience in IIT Gandhinagar, they have an open culture of interdisciplinary meet. So I have friends from various disciplines who sometimes we talk, we chat over coffee or tea, that that what work are we doing, and that if they have any questions or biases in their mind, I sort of help them. We have a dialogue where we can sort of quell it out. So, but to put it out on the public space these days, we have an advantage of blogs, of media, where you can put up your research, and it's not something that you are just cooking up out of thin air. It's you have conducted fieldwork, you spend time in the field, and then you've put up your story maybe on that blog. So, and if that attracts readership, viewership, that can be a start of countering a lot of these myths that have been pervading in the public domain for a long time. So I would say use technology to your benefit. I mean, say that if technology is there, don't just shy away from it. You can move toward this, and you can ultimately use it to quell all these myths, all these misinformed behavior that the public might have. So that's one way to.
Just a second. Now we will go online. Ravina, is Ravina wants to ask a question? Kirtana? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir. I'm Ravina from IIT Roorkee. Sir, I wanted to actually know about like one of the types of ethnography, which is spatial ethnography. So for my PhD work, I am planning on working in a marketplace in Pondicherry. So I was thinking if you can actually elaborate on what spatial ethnography is.
Spatial ethnography, is it correct?
Yes, sir.
Spatial ethnography. I would say, okay. And if you're looking at, so can you sort of spell out as to what is it that you are planning to do in the, like in your field of view? Then I can give you a more pointed answer, because spatial ethnography is also huge.
Yes, sir, because I have been reading literature on street vendors. So I have seen how various studies have focused on spatial ethnography and seen how the public space is actually, and like the interactions which go on in the public space. They have used the method spatial ethnography in that. So I was wondering what exactly that could be if I'm focusing on the vendors per se in a marketplace.
Okay, I think we can have a longer discussion on that later. But I think immediately, if I have to address that, I would say look at the way space has been created. How has market space actually been created? I mean, is it for the street vendors, or is it for a certain elite of among the public who actually dictates the presence of hawkers, of the vendors, or of the a market is also a place where all these where market can also be a reflection of who actually controls that area, that space. So if you read works of Lefebvre or David Howe, they always say that how geography is not just how the geographical space is not geographical in and of itself. It's also political, it's also economic, it's also social. So these are factors that inform how a market is actually determined. How does the market actually come into being? Who runs the market, and who runs the what class people, and maybe you can also see what caste of people are running the are part of this or are part of this market structure. And it is then that you have to really come in and as an ethnographer, as you said, that that you need an entry point into that market. And for that you need someone who has been maybe a vendor, or someone be it can be a trade union person, it can be anyone, someone who has experienced that market for a long time. That person can guide you inside the dynamics of that area, and that's where you actually start looking at space as to who controls, who runs that space. So that is one way of looking at spatial ethnography. So I mean, we can have a longer conversation on that. I think if you have to begin on that's how I would begin on that.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
So first of all, I would like to thank you for such an insightful presentation. So my question is, so as you said that ethnographic research is a time-consuming and as master students, how are we supposed to carry out our dissertation work from an ethnographic framework, considering the short amount of time that we are given?
Yeah, that's always a challenge for master, because you have it's a 2-year program, and then you have classwork, you have assignments, your project, you have all kinds of things. I would say at this level it's not possible for you to do a full scope ethnographic study, but I think you can, even if you're doing, say, some sort of fieldwork, maybe during your holidays, or your extended periods of break. You can see this period as a sort of an entry point into ethnography. Maybe you can, even if you're doing, say, field work, so the work that you will do might not be classified as fully ethnographic. It can be considered, say, good enough for a report, or a thesis, for a master's thesis. What I would say is that, but at least start learning about the various tools and techniques that you can deploy for your advanced set of physics. Those of you who would want to go for further, maybe for an academic pursuit, or maybe even otherwise, like even if you are not going for an for an academic job later on, research is something that will be a part of your lives. At it can be in any form, be it a job or be it even if a consultant, or it can be research will always be part of your profile. So what I would say at the master's level is that just learn how to gather your tools, learn how to maybe enter a field, start having conversations with people, and that can be your foundation to build a wider project, a wider research area in the future. And that will, so it's always it's not that if you're not able to conduct full sweeping ethnography at this stage, it's not that you shouldn't be disheartened because of that. But I would say, given your limitations, if you can learn it in this phase, it will help you to build your profile in the future. That's how I'd say.
Hey Suding, if I'm pronouncing it right, please ask your question. Hey Suding, you there? Okay. Any more questions here?
So Ding is, I think his hand is raised.
You've unmuted. Just a second. Hey Suding, can you hear us? Please ask your question. Okay, please.
Or maybe he can just type it in the chat box if he's not able to. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, we did discussed about time predictions in the field. So in the circumstances, is it necessary that we should change our research objectives, because acknowledging such things are also important, right? Because when we find that there is a difference between our intuitions and what we observe in the field, we can through such research we can also understand how the things have changed, or what are the other factors. So like we are also master students, so we may face this issue while we are doing our dissertation. So how we go about with that? Should we actually change our research objectives or something like that?
Okay, that's an important question, because I feel that there's always a time crunch that you are facing in this. One thing is that it depends. If you change your research objectives and research questions, it might change your research completely. So you have to take a call, maybe with your supervisor or maybe with your own intuition at that particular moment, that what are the implications of changing the research questions. Always look at the end goal of the thing, because if you change your research questions complete, you can change it, but you have to be convinced that, see, if you change it, then again you're faced with another situation which is not up to your thing. Then how many times would you like to change it? There has to come a point where you have to where you have to keep a full stop and say that, okay, I will not, I might change the dynamics of my question, but the inherent question that I wanted to ask, I'll maybe keep it the same. So changing or not is a call that you have to take based on the time that you have, based on what you actually want to study or research in that particular field. So that, I think, is dependent on your it has to be your call. So that's also where, in a way, your decision making power comes into the picture, that you have to see that this is your end goal, this is what you want to achieve in a particular time frame. How can you achieve that? So that's something you have to, take a call at your own point.
Yes. Okay. Just a second, we'll try. Hey Suding, do you want to ask question? We can't hear you. If you can hear us and you still have a question, please type it in the chat box. If you're facing any difficulties in asking that question, you can type it in the chat box. Yeah.
You can please type your questions. Those who are there in the online mode, if you're having any difficulties, please type your questions in the chat box. We'll take it up from there.
Yeah. Please.
Wonderful. So how to suppose some topic is taking people to their hardships, like they get emotional.
So how to get back to it, like how to make it hassle-free, how to make it easy for them to.
It will never be hassle free. I can assure you of that. There will be times when, like you are see when you ask, it's always opening fresh wounds. So it's fieldwork is also a roller coaster of. So I think you should have some degree of emotional maturity when you are dealing with sensitive topics, when you're dealing with topics that have affected people, because when they open up, maybe they might cry, they might go into depression, they might be, it's, all kinds of possibilities are there. But I would say that it's your job to maybe, for lack of a better word, to comfort them, to assure them that you are telling their story. That is something I mentioned, that it's your ethical responsibility that you are telling their story to a much wider audience which hasn't been exposed to their part of the story. So you have to really give them the hope and confidence that you will make sure that their story reaches a much wider audience. And if an intervention comes in the form of a court case or something that rules in favor of their thing, that can be and it has happened in the past. So it's not that all your effort goes into waste, but at that particular moment you have to really, like, um, hold steady, and as yourself, like you also might be going through that emotion, but you have to really take control of yourself and not allow them to wither away. They might get carried away because of their emotions, but you have to in a way bring them back and really finish that conversation, that story. It's, if you don't do that, then if you will only be left with a half-baked story, and that's not going to help either you or them. So it's, you have to maintain that rhythm. Yeah. I'm trying to see if there's anything on chat. Marshall. This was, I think, yesterday's. Yes. Hi.
And my question is, in case we want to do a research about a tribe which do not have historical documentations. So in that case, what I feel is we'll go to we'll have uh, our reports based on what the people will tell us. So and given that the tribe, that particular tribe has a very less population now, how do we go about it? Because as you said, whatever the inspectors will come and will have to give historical reasoning to it. So how do we do it if in case the tribe do not have a historical stuff?
Yeah. That's also an important question. So if you see the very first anthropological reports, they were also coming in at a time when there was no there was no anthropological report ever written about any community. But still today there are communities whose histories have not been documented, whose say language is in danger of getting wiped out. So if you are working on that, I think it's your responsibility to spend even more time with them, even if you are part of that community. Because if you're not, it makes it even more challenging when you are studying your own community, because you are getting your own preferences to that community. So you have to be, in a way, the whole idea that even if you're getting an insider's point of view, you need to make sure that since the story has never been told, spend more time with them, so that the depth of data that you bring out from that community will serve not just as a knowledge tool, it can also serve as a repository for future researchers from that tribe, or the community which from where you're coming in. So I think one way of looking at it is that since no research has been done, it adds an additional responsibility to you, that you have to be even more proactive in terms of talking to your community, talking about their challenges, talking about why is it that they're facing, why is it that their population number is slowly decreasing, what are the factors that are going about in that behind this process. So it will be a challenging study, but I feel that if you can conduct it in a proper way, it will also be a rewarding study, because that can serve as a guideline for other people to look and sort of maybe make an intervention or a policy that can help them to address their issues. So maybe we can have a conversation on that maybe later on, because I think this is something that has been also affecting like one of my students Fieldworks. So that's something that I'm seeing in increasingly getting more and more traction. So I feel that you have to spend more time with them, even if you're part of that community. So the reason I'm saying you have to spend more time with them, maybe longer than what other people would spend with say other communities, is because you're trying to understand your own community's problems, your own community's crisis, which is which other people might not immediately get a hang on, because they are not part of that community. So since you are working on that particular issue, so I would say spend more time, get more issues out of your tribe, and sort of bring it to the table and sort of arrange it, so that it educates you. As I said, it educates you first of all, then it will also educate the other people who will be reading your work.
Also, sir, when we're writing our reports, so as we said that emotions are involved. So I'd like to know the degree of emotion, because when we're telling the story, we cannot be at all we cannot be emotionless, or we cannot be very emotional. There should be arguments, there should be reason, and reason they do not stand on the emotion. So what should be the degree of emotion?
I can't, I don't know a complete answer to that, but I would say that you have to let it run its course. If you're going, as I think I was just answering her that, if there's an outburst or an outpour of emotions from their side, don't stop them immediately. Let them tell their story. And once they tell their story to you, once you have it with maybe in your diary, or you've recorded it, you have to see that is being told to you in a very raw form, and it is your job as a researcher to restructure that in a scientific, rational, coherent manner. What we had discussed, like you have to the whole idea of one of the ideas of research is to unstructure rawness and give it a structure. Sort of unpack rawness and give it into a coherent structure. That is one of the tasks, that whatever data you will get on the field will be unstructured, will be raw, will be, it won't have a coherent form or shape. You have to bring it back maybe to campus, or maybe even there at the field itself. I think it's better if you stay on the field and write your report, because there you get an immediate sense of the field at that very moment. So I would say, even if there is an emotional outbreak at that time, don't stop it. Let it run its course. Let them speak what they have to speak, and then once you know that that they have in a way covered all the points in what they had to say, then only you will be able to maybe restructure that into an argumentative form in a more coherent manner. So that's how I have dealt with it in my field. Yeah. Yeah.
Good morning. First of all, we got a chance to interact with Dr. Diane. All I couldn't get was what you were saying here. And my question is, what is the role and you can say the scope of technology research, whether it is spreadsheets in what is the role?
Oh, sorry. Can you come again? The role of technology
Research.
in research. Um, I would say it's getting more traction now than it. I mean, see, technology has always been there in research in terms of all the way. If you go back to your recording machines, if you go back to how it was actually used as a tool in research, now you have software which helps you to collate data. I mean, I have a problem with software uh, uh, which in a way analyzes ethnographic material because it's not that software isn't you. It wasn't there when you were conducting field work. It wasn't there when you were because you just collated data and you fed it into that software. So the analysis that the software can give might not match your own analysis. So even when you're using technology, you have to be careful that is it enhancing your own understanding of the field, or is it really coming up with an outcome that which is not matching your observations from the field. So technology as a tool can certainly enhance you to make your life easier on the field. But once you there are two ways in which I would answer this. One is the technology that you use on the field through maybe instruments or other devices which help you to get which help you on the field. The other is the analysis part. You have softwares, you have code breakers, you have all kinds of tech things that can make that apparently seem fancy and nice. But you have to take a call as to, do you want to feed your material in that software that can. Some of my friends did that while doing their PhD, and it gave them dramatically opposite results to what they had encountered in the field. It can give you a nice pie chart. It can give you a nice, it can give you an answer which is not matching your own experiences. So you have to take a call as to what is it that, where does the role of technology help you and where does it actually limit you as a researcher? So it's not that technology is always an enabling feature in your fieldwork. Sometimes it can also limit you in your analysis. So I think that is something that you will have to take a call on while you are once you've been there on the field and once you're back from the field. So on both sides, you have to I would say take a call as to how much technology do you really want to be part of your field work, because how much of the non-human part do you want to be do you want to make it do you want to make part of your field work? So that's something that you have to really take a call. I think it depends on person to person, so that's how I would look at it.
We are coming up with that prerequisite, like how you should have that hands-on experience in all this technology. So the reason I asked him how much and how far scope of this technology while conducting this research.
Yeah, I mean, it's also dependent on, I mean, that's also one of the pressures of the job market, that certain companies look for software enabled people because that's how they conduct research. So you have to take a call as to where do you really want to go later on after you've finished your master's, after you finished your research, because sometimes the data sets that these large companies produce can also be misleading even for them. So they are looking for skilled researchers who are skilled in this because of that's how they conduct research. So you have to take a call as to whether you want to be part of that or whether you want to be part of some other body which will prefer a more hands-on working experience. And so that's how I look at it. I mean, that's how I've seen that's how most of the I see the job market. That's how I see most of these companies who actually hire you for their own ways of conducting research. So you have to take a call on that front. So
Also, while choosing the research topic, how do you suggest, I mean, whether we have to go or looking for the contemporary happening issues or maybe the existing one? What should be the better topic to choose?
Sorry, I missed the last. Either contemporary or
Already happened research.
all. But if you say already happened, which means you will be primarily looking at secondary data. So even if you look at secondary data, you have to see that does that secondary data hold true in today's world, right? If you're not conducting fieldwork, even if you're looking at secondary data, maybe that the findings were true at that particular time, but is it true today? At least that is your job as a researcher, that you have to find out that even if so some degree of analysis has to take place. It's not that you will just, even if you're not conducting field work, what is your contribution to that particular data set? So you have the chance to either to approve it or to say that no, things there have been some changes from that particular time frame. So that again is that degree of analysis has to come out.
Also, sir, one more question, last question. While conducting research, is it mandatory to follow pestle analysis or maybe SWOT analysis like strength, weakness, and threatness?
Okay.
So do we have to, consider all this area while conducting the research?
I mean, it depends on the scope of your research. If you're really doing a very minute research, and maybe it can just be limited to that particular domain or that particular region. But if you're doing a wide scale, um, um, like for instance, in a PhD, yes, you will need to understand it from multiple points of view. But for a master's, maybe you can look at one or two key points, one or two perspectives, be it a historical or be it a regional or be it a development, whatever is it that is being required from you at that point of time. I think it depends on the scope of the research that you are doing and the scale. That what is the time frame in which you're doing your research? What is the time limit under which you're doing your research? How much can you actually cover in that particular time period? Again, what will be the limitations of your research? Every research is limited based on the time period, based on the researchers backdrops, be it so you always have to, it's not that see, whatever research you do, wherever you end your research on will be the starting point of another researcher. So that's something that I think you will come to know based on your own research and like when you do it. So it depends on if it's for a master's thesis, it might not have a full scale effect or a full scale potentiality, but it will just, even if you just start doing research, you will get an idea, you will get a hunch that okay, this is how you actually conduct research, and then that can, as I said, it will help you to build on that for the future.
Anybody else? Or we go for a break? If you have a question, just a second. Anybody online have questions?
Any online queries?
Okay, fine. Yeah. So that will be the last question. And then we will break. After the break, we will have a writing session.
Yeah.
We will give you papers. Hope everybody have pens with you.
So thank you so much, sir, for the informative session. My question is about, you mentioned about pilot study, right? So could you please elaborate upon that? Because I felt that pilot study is something in which you have a relatively short-term engagement with your field, and that can go in a long way in your research.
Yeah.
Could you please explain?
So what I meant by that is that you should not jump into your field immediately, because then you will be lost. The idea of a pilot study is to familiarize yourself with the field. It's like, okay, you have an idea in your mind, you find it interesting, you want to explore it further, then you go to the field and you say that when the very first time you will go to your field, you will be lost. You won't know head or tail what to do about it. The idea of a pilot study is that it will expose you to the field as a setting. It will you will start interacting with people who have been there and the field. They will be your primary respondents. They will be the people who will actually invite you inside the field. There's an invitation into the field. Once that happens, once you start talking to them, once you start interacting with them, you will get you will start familiarizing yourself with the field. And then that should and then in that time itself, you have to make sure you have to, in a way, reach out. As I said, you have to do a snowball sampling of potential people whom you might interview once you come for your main field work. So you have to build contacts. You have to reach out to people who have been affected, or people who were part of the power structure. You have to reach out to all different kinds of. You have to in a way do. You have to get a set of people whom you will be interviewing, whom you will be doing an in-depth interview with in that short in the time that you are there in the field. So that is your task in the pilot study. The pilot study is first of all meant to declutter your mind, to make yourself familiar with the field, and then to build contacts whom you will further interview once you come and do your main field. So that's the whole idea of pilot study.
Break.
We can take a break. For how long do we?
1 minute, 11:40, 15 minutes.
Okay, so we break for maybe 15-20 minutes, and we'll come back and we'll do a short exercise on writing.
Tea is outside. Please. Yeah. Tell them. Same thing you told us.
No, I'm not reading from my end.
People who are attending the session online, we are taking a short break of 15 minutes. We'll be back here by 11:45, and then we'll have a writing exercise. So what we'll do is you can write you can write it yourself, and then if we are collecting the samples, you can mail it to us, and if we are discussing, then we'll have a discussion session.